and welcome to Basic Bible Study. We are studying Acts of the Apostles and are at this moment halfway through the book with chapter 14. It is the first missionary journey of Barnabas and Paul, and they've just had some adventures in Cyprus and Antioch of Pisidia. They're on the southern coast of what is today Turkey, and they move on to a city called Iconium, where preaching in the synagogues, the disciples managed to bring about a great deal of interest in what they have to say about the messiahship of Jesus of Nazareth. We're told that the people of the city were divided, some with the Jews, others with the apostles, when there was an attempt by both the Gentiles and the Jews, so those who did not agree with them, to attack and stone them. Barnabas and Paul realized it and fled to the Lycaonian cities of Lystra and Derbe, and to the surrounding countryside where they continued to proclaim the good news. Okay, so again, a very mixed reaction. There were a lot of people at Iconium who were following what Paul and Barnabas said, enough so that those who were against them were able to actually threaten their lives. And again, this was not the time for them to be martyred. This is a time for them to be missionaries. And so they fled and went to nearby cities there along the Anatolian coast. The situation at Lystra is really interesting. The people of the city see a miracle. All right, they see a miracle where a man who has been unable to walk since birth Paul looks at him and sees he's got the faith to be healed. We're told that. He has the faith to be healed. Paul sees that. And this is an important point. It's an important point with almost any part of Bible study, that faith moves mountains. Faith brings about healings, all right? This man has the faith. Paul sees it to be healed. He stretches out his hand. He says, "Stand up straight on your feet." The man jumps up and begins to walk about. When the crowd saw what Paul had done, they cried out in Lycaonian. I'm not sure how to pronounce that. Lycaonian, in their own language. This is interesting, because this is part of the adventure of Acts of the Apostles. They cried out in their own language, "The gods have come down to us in human form." They called Barnabas Zeus and Paul Hermes, because he was the chief speaker. Hermes is the messenger of the gods. That's Mercury for the Roman gods. Zeus, of course, he's Jupiter to the Romans. And the priest of Zeus, whose temple was at the entrance to the city, brought oxen and garlands to the gates, for he, together with the people, intended to offer sacrifice. Can you imagine? The priests of the temple of Zeus, and they still had Roman and Greek temples all over the ancient world. I don't know how many of the Romans and the Greeks and so forth really still believed in their gods and goddesses. If you study the sort of the religious template of the first century Mediterranean world, certain philosophies such as Stoicism had become popular. Certain blood orgy cults, like the one to Mithras, who was a bull god, and the goddess Cybele, also were popular. The ancient Roman and Greek gods and goddesses, I don't know, but they all still had temples all over these cities. And so here's the priest of the temple of Zeus, which is right outside the city, bringing oxen and garlands and preparing a sacrifice. And the people are all for it, because Zeus has come to them in the flesh, and Hermes, Mercury, his mouthpiece, his speaker. The apostles Barnabas and Paul tore their garments when they heard this, and rushed outside into the crowd, shouting, "Men, why are you doing this? We are of the same nature as you, human beings. We proclaim to you good news, that you should turn from these idols to the living God, who made heaven and earth and sea and all that is in them. In past generations he allowed the Gentiles to go their own ways. Yet in bestowing his goodness he did not leave himself without witness, for he gave you rains from heaven and fruitful seasons, and filled you with nourishment and gladness for your hearts." Even with these words, though, they scarcely restrained the crowds from offering sacrifice to them. All right, so that's can you imagine the scene? Imagine the scene, the priest coming forward, "My gosh, my God, Zeus, literally, my God, Zeus, is here in the flesh. That was the response of the people to the healing of the paralyzed man out there by the city gate. They are forced to abandon these cities along the Lycaonian coast, however, because the folks from Antioch and Iconium, Antioch and Pisidia and Iconium, who had opposed them, come with them, come to the cities and try to disrupt the missionary work of Paul and Barnabas, and they have some success with it. And Paul and Barnabas are forced at this point simply to kind of retrace their steps and wrap up the missionary journey. They've made a lot of success. They've made a lot of converts among the Gentiles. I need to say that at some point along this journey, John Mark, that is to say the young guy who would write Mark's gospel, left them. And that did not sit well with Paul. We'll hear more about that later. Barnabas was seen to be willing to overlook it, but John Mark got bored, as maybe an early 20-something might, and he hopped a ship back to Israel during the midst of this journey. That did not go over well with Paul. They had been, as I say, into the Lycaonian cities, Lystra and Derbe, when they find themselves opposed by some people are really holding on to the grudge. We lost a lot of people at synagogue because of you, and we're not going to let you continue to disrupt worship services in our houses of prayer here on the Lycaonian coast. And so they come, they make more trouble for Barnabas and Paul, and this brings about the end of the first mission. Now this is important to read. This is the last paragraph of chapter 14, and it gives us some important information about how the early church grew. After they had proclaimed the good news in Derbe and made a considerable number of disciples, they returned to Lystra and to Iconium and to Antioch. So even though they had these enemies coming after them and disrupting their work along the Lycaonian coast, they nonetheless get back to those cities and visit their newly formed communities, because they made a lot of Gentile converts there. They strengthened the spirits of the disciples and exhorted them to persevere in the faith, saying, "It is necessary for us to undergo many hardships to enter the kingdom of God." They appointed presbyters for them in each church, and with prayer and fasting commended them to the Lord, in whom they had put their faith. All right, presbyters, this is a new word. They appointed presbyters. The word actually means, it translates as elder. It's also the root word for our word priest. They appointed leaders, in other words, for the cities along the Lycaonian coast, for Antioch and Pisidia, for Lystra and Derbe and Iconium. They appointed people to lead these communities. And the word that they're using now is it's not apostle and it's not deacon. It's presbyter. This is the first sign we have that a middle level in terms of the leadership of the church, the hierarchical leadership of the church, has begun to develop. The level that is called presbyter, which comes to be understood later simply as priest. All right, so this is chapter 14. It's the first time we see the hint of an office of leadership, of prayer. Okay, these presbyteries are going to lead their communities in prayer and worship, as the apostles do back in Jerusalem. And remember, back in chapter 6, when they formed the diaconate was for service. And the apostles were supposed to devote themselves to prayer and the preaching of the word. So presbyteers got something to do with that, with prayer and preaching of the word. All right, and this is the first time we see the word here in Acts of the Apostles. We're halfway through the book, so the church is developing its organizational and hierarchical status as we see the evangelization itself taking place. As needs develop for a particular kind of office, the office itself also develops. This is basic Bible study, Acts of the Apostles. We've just looked at chapter 14. We now move into the second half of the book. Thanks for being with us. Hope to see you again, and God bless you.